Okay. Let's get started. So a good starting point could be maybe 1985 and the book Hedge Money Socialist Strategy by Chantal Mouffe
Sure.
and Esther Laclau. To me, that book, when it arrived already, when I read it, it was the middle class, the academic middle class who were all leftist and had this posture, posing as leftists, being completely disappointed with the working class because the revolution that they
Diner
had.
Marxism.
Yeah. So
I was
exactly.
part of
So
that.
the Marxist revolution never happened, and they betrayed Marx. They dropped Marx and went back to Rousseau. And the problem has been ever since. We've had this Jacobin culture with sort of peak woke, and you and I probably both detest the Venice Biennale in 2023 when they
Oh,
emptied
of
the
course,
whole
but
place. It was all like a huge guilt complex without architecture.
it's been building up for years there. So,
Yeah.
so we're non-left Marxists, and for me, it starts with historical materialism. And if I look at your information technological historiography, that's in the tradition of, but it adds something. It adds something which Marx neglected. But I wanted to come in here. I don't think. I mean, and you can pin up something, but then a lot of other things follow. And what's the key factor here? Is it information technology, or that's the challenge here, production technology? And of course, they're both factors. And Marx has foregrounded production technology, you foregrounding information technology, but I think production technology plays a huge role too.
Yeah,
Still,
I'm a Marxist in the sense that I believe class analysis should be fundamental to understanding a flock
that's the other
animal
thing where
or
you
human.
where you where
But
you
but
where
but but
you
if you
going
skip
in.
if you skip Utopia because the Communist Manifesto wasn't really a Marxist book at all. If you just take that book out of the picture and then look at Marx as an analyst, then it suddenly starts to make a lot of sense. It's like one friend told me once, like, "Why didn't Nietzsche have a best buddy?" Which I think was a very clever one-liner. Well, that's exactly what we need Marx because Nietzsche was only his own body all the time, the formidable individualist in a way,
Well,
taking
what
that
I
you
love
say.
most, what I use most from the Communist Manifesto is this kind of fantastic eulogism about capitalism. Capitalism, the great innovation engine, revolutionizing everything, ripping everybody out of urbanizing, ripping everybody out of their rural idiocy, and this kind of permanent revolution of the means of production and battering down all Chinese walls and so on and so forth. I mean, it's the most spirited and energizing, and that's what I look now as a pro-capitalist, by the way. What I find in the communist,
But so was Karl Marx, and so am I. Totally
that's what I mean. I
pro-capitalist. Yeah,
mean,
yeah. The question is, what can we do after that? What can we do more than that on top of it? That should always be the creative question,
absolutely.
of
And I mean, I
course.
just come out with that straight out. I mean, I'm a kind of, let's say, libertarian Marxist, anarcho-capitalist Marxist.
I
And
go all the way and call myself an extreme right Marxist
I know.
because the kids love
I
it.
know
It
you
just
don't
makes a
like
lot
the
more sense.
libertarians, and
Yeah,
look,
you don't have to be touched with that. You're probably too established to actually be able to own that label. But I can be free enough
I
to call
know a
myself
few.
an
I
extreme
like
right
it's so,
Marxist.
but I want to pick you up on one thing.
Mm.
Your notion that the human, let's say, subjectivity, psyche, whatever, the substrate of societal evolution, that human being, that evolutionary creature, is the constant. I think, I mean, that's what we all brought up on. That's on the, many levels. There's a tension there that we don't, sociobiology, we are still who we were in the hunter and gatherers. That's the one notion. The other one is that infinite plasticity for everything new. But I think on the level, what I found fascinating to reflect, there has been also evolution has been continuing and co-evolution between biological evolution, cultural evolution, and even in the last 1,000 years, there's been a lot of transformation, I believe. And where I picked that up from, I'm not sure you're aware of Gregory Clark with his book Farewell to Arms. There's some puns on Hemingway and The Sun Also Rises, where he's talking about, or he's pointing out, for instance, that the current population of Britain is 99% descendants of the aristocracy. And
Mm.
that you had, and one of the things, why was this takeoff, this kind of hockey stick thing, the escape from the Malthusian trap made possible in Britain, several hundred years of weeding out and rewarding success, because you basically social mobility for centuries was downward. The highest strata had much more children and offspring, and at the lower end, zero, and then it scales down. So you have this kind of evolutionary process and the selection for, I would say, let's say, capitalist virtues and characters and skills. And I saw those things, yeah, how could you say this real constant? There's nothing going on. And sometimes I compare this to this. I mean, I haven't picked that up from.
Well, but let me just preface that, because actually everything is in flux. I'm totally with Heraclitus against Plato, totally Nietzschean in that sense. But the thing is that the fluxes occur at different speeds. And when I provocatively say the human is the constant in relation to technology, because today we have to see technology as the variable.
Technology is the active part.
That's the only constant we ever have. It's more constant,
technology is the
less
active
flexible,
part.
right?
But the other thing is this, I agree with it. There's a hierarchy, and it's very important. As somebody who used to be on the left, an activist, you have to, there's many points, many nuances, many ifs and buts, and let's say qualifications. But you have to, the headline. What do you put in the headline? What do you put in the subtitle? What are the next 5 kind of elaborations, qualifications? So you really, it is a lot to do with that, not only for communication, but actually also for thinking through and driving activism. So I'm totally with you. The truly active, dynamic part in history is technology, right? And it brings a lot of other things into play. But I also believe that part of technology, and that's how much we stretch that, and it's also information technology, is not only production technology, but it's also warfare, etc. But it connects, of course, with hardcore technology. But it's also something like, let's say, with Luhmann was always track all the way through.
Oh, by the way, we should wave these books. So this is Patrik here for my followers. This is Patrik. Brilliant. Fantastic, big, thick books, like the way I do it, really good books. Like, if you really want to be smart, you read that. And here's Luhmann, who I think is, to you, what Deleuze is to me.
Right.
To me, Luhmann is the German Deleuze, essentially. It's just a system complexity theory thought thoroughly through late 20th century. And I see Luhmann in your work constantly, if I'm right. So.
But by the way, Deleuze has been absolutely amazing, the figure which helped architecture in my discipline in the late 80s, early 90s. Early 90s really picked up, but I picked them up in 87 first when Thousand Plateaus, and it's only Thousand Plateaus, by the way. It's not the rest of any of Deleuze. And it's when Deleuze and Guattari come together in Thousand Plateaus, which has been such a fertile force. And we've been talking about...
Are you friends with Manuel de Landa?
Yes.
Okay, we were friends back in the 80s before we had our breakthroughs and became famous or whatever. And we did drugs on top of skyscrapers in New York. So you know that I'm
chemical liberation.
And he brought Deleuze to America and never read Whitehead. The incredible thing with Delanda is, I don't know if the drugs helped him out or whatever. He just read Deleuze and brought Deleuze to America, eventually became even a theorist on architecture because he was Deleuzian. But Delanda actually never read Whitehead, which to me is weird because after all, he comes to North America. I just wanted to make the little
of course. I mean, what maybe it's not appreciated now because it has kind of done its work and put us on track. And as we, but let's say from it really took off with Deleuzian discourse and Thousand Plateaus. Many of his concepts became very fertile and really critical in pushing on this movement, which is, I think, let's say, the architectural discipline's answer to what you call, let's say, informationalism, which I more talk about the post-Fordist network society, which is not only information technology, but also computational production technologies. Anyway, that's the answer of architecture to this transformation, this socioeconomic, societal transformation, that new stage, I would still say stage of capitalism, parametricism. There was a movement, it was kind of revelatory, incorporating also all the digital technologies in terms of design, production, and proliferation, and totally new concepts. Deleuze was absolutely critical.
And was it also Deleuze incredibly refreshing in the 80s and 90s when everything else was going deconstruction? And we know what deconstruction ends up. We end up with the Bronze Age collapse in Egypt. With deconstruction, we end up with this endless bureaucracy that says no to things.
I mean, look, deconstructivism was,
no to things.
There's a whole style called deconstructivism in architecture. So Derrida was actually collaborating with both Bernard Tschumi and Peter Eisenman, and there was a thing, deconstructivism. It was not gripping. It was slightly artificial. It was marginal. That couldn't deliver. But Deleuze helped to deliver something which took off throughout all the 90s and into the early 2000s. Unfortunately, it ran into problems basically since 2008. There all this dynamism, all this kind of boom and architects all over the place, globalization, development everywhere. That came to a halt. You had backlash, anti-capitalism, you had Occupy movement, etc., etc. So that unfortunately killed off that journey, and soon later the whole disciplines descended into woke self-destruction and self-destruction. But this period of the 90s and into 2000, let's say 8, up to 2008, Deleuze was incredibly, forward-looking, and the transformation in terms of our basic conceptual repertoires, values, methodologies, etc., and it's been the most transformational in all these great transformations of, let's say, the architectural paradigms or the great epochal styles of architecture. It's the most dramatic transformation. And I'm tracking the great styles or epochal styles of architecture in this alignment with socioeconomic epochs.
Yes.
And there you cannot only have four. You have basically, with capitalism, architecture as a proper discipline, theory-led, with authors, with complete designs, with discourse, with books, starts with early capitalism in the Renaissance. And then what you really need to go to is a series of subsidiary stages within capitalism. The early capitalism of the city-states, that's the Renaissance. The Baroque is aligning with the absolutism, mercantilism of the 17th and 18th century, and then come the bourgeois revolutions. And you move from Baroque and Rococo into neoclassicism, the historicism, all the recycling of these styles, and then the next stage is another subsidiary, and that aligns with the bourgeois revolution, the laissez-faire capitalism, and then when you move, modernism is coinciding with monopoly capital, Fordism, the socialist revolutions aligning with that technological paradigm, and that brings on modernism. Now, and you're absolutely right, and in the 80s. You have that great transformation out of modernism into then postmodernism, deconstruction. I say it starts a bit earlier. That's where I think my challenge to you is, if you only focus on information technology and the internet, which is massive, but I focus on computational production technologies, which is post-Fordism, this technologies which absorb much more innovation, which means smaller runs, economies of scope. The whole discourse, I'm not sure if you were, I was very much within the midst of it. It started in the 80s, the post-Fordism debate, coming of Marxism today, but of course its roots were in the 70s, Alietta regulation school. In the 70s, you also have the early beginnings of postmodernism. So you can start to see, and of course the economic crisis, the kind of breakdown of the post-war social democratic, quasi-socialist. So that is, the internet comes later and accelerates, and actually I think the internet flourishes because of post-Fordism. The internet without post-Fordism was just a technology which wouldn't have been used, and you need early adopters within industry to push this forward. So that's why I think you can't. I love the way you highlight information technology, but it obviously is not the full story.
I think what we agree on is something that we, as philosophers, your theorists on architecture, what we call emergence vector theory. I think that's what we really meet. We're frustrated. I see in your work, like in mine, I'm frustrated with the fact that people can't tell difference. They can't keep things different. They try to find metaphor constantly, and they try to find that if it's there, then it must be there, it must be there. And then they're all reducing themselves back to their own origin as subjects, like their own birth, and everything has to be reduced to some kind of thing. So what you're doing in your work, which I find brilliant, I mean, you're literally doing architecture for the sake of architecture, which I think is the only place architecture can go now, which I find liberating. But it's like architecture in your work is its own emergence vector. Architecture was born, it emerged, it's its own vector. It's not art, it's not anything, it's architecture. It's its own discourse, its own field, it does its own thing. And the way politics is really about power and money, then you're dealing with space, how you organize space, right?
Yeah,
and the point with the internet revolution in my work is simply that the four major information technological paradigms are starting points for complex dialectical processes, where the entire dialectical process is the human as the constant reacting to technological change. And of course, some humans then jumping onto the creative possibilities of novelty that comes out of the new technologies as they interact with human beings. So, for example, the internet started, say, in 1980s. We got the World Wide Web in 1990s. Now we're doing AI, but it all comes out of the same basic technology, which is the organization of data flows around the planet, taking data from everything, adding more and more data, and then processing this data more and more intelligently. And therefore, we have new, fantastic, creative opportunities coming up.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how. So I think we agree in that we're both believers in emergence vectors. We believe that something happens historically along the timeline, and suddenly that enables a new dialectical process to occur. And that's what I mean. And to me, you're the great defender of taking post, Deleuzian back to Luhmann, and then starting thinking architecture. Wait a second, get this bullshit out of here, because architecture should allow B2B its own field and respect it as its own field,
it's
own history.
I first of all, I pulled together not only architecture, it's of course it's urban design, architecture design, interior design, also industrial design, product design, furniture design, fashion design, graphic design, all the design disciplines. Since I'm an architect and I address first my immediate discipline, but this is a unity of discourse, which you also find in the Bauhaus. We also find in our firm, we're addressing all of that. We have very similar lead distinctions and value systems, and the same revolutions which drive architecture, drive all the other design disciplines. So that's one thing. So what I need to, and it includes, by the way, graphic design, all the designers working on the internet itself, because that's, and cyberspace. Now we're shifting within the internet from an internet based on basically the analogy to the magazine, text, content lists, graphic image into and leaving traces, writings, messaging into real-time, full-on 3D, based on analogy of the city. So as synergy clusters on cities, where browsing becomes a real encompassing, immersive experience with signals and possibilities of participation above, below, all around in layers. I mean, I'm working on the metaverse, and that's fully within the design disciplines, because every human interaction, and that's something which will ever occur, like this one. There's a designer colleague, one of my colleagues has structured that interface, with menu bars, with the 3 images, with lists, with interactions. So all the elements, organization, articulation, what is becoming conspicuous, let's say, reflecting, the psychology of perception, semiology, iconography, but also dramaturgy. These are the 4 categories which structure the field of design. Where can you click? Where can you manipulate? Where can you interact? So, and that is also in the building. You have organizing, you have distribution, you have phenomenology. Do you recognize what belongs together? Where's the entrance? You have semiology. Carpet brings people into a situation where you climb down. And bright light and hard surfaces as we're working. And then you have dramaturgy. Switch on the light, open that door, shift that parament. So you can do these. This is a unified discourse. And what is potent is this. It's not all professionalized. It's all discourse-led. So if I throw something on YouTube in my latest lecture, or anybody is posting things on Instagram, they go everywhere. And every piece of design, the totality of our phenomenological world was created by a designer. Where you sit, the lamp, the laptop, these are colleagues we know and love. The Apple, they're heroes, the designer of the Apple iPhone, the interface itself. And there's issues and critiques. Everything you ever touch, even landscape design now in the city, you never escape. Every situation, you're dressing up for an occasion. Designers allow you to self-sort into a sociological kind of matrix. Everything you ever surrounded with. And I was saying is, any communication is interfaced, framed by a colleague, by that professional discourse, which continuously updates with everything I post. And I promise you, everybody who's ever doing now anything you'll ever touch or see knows me and my discourse. but I'm still frustrated. Why? Because it's all swamped by people who don't understand any of this, who want to talk about, anti-racism, where the diminishing returns.
Sustainability. There's no word I hate more than the S word. I'm so sick of it. After all, we're dealing with the fashion of the gods. I'm sure Owen agrees with me. We're dealing with the fashion of the gods. That's how we romantics consider architecture. It's like there's the fashion of humans, and that's fashion, basically. In the
By the way, I'm a fashion designer
but
too. Fashion is underestimated. I mean, we need it. There's no chance that you could have a contemporary society without a kind of expansive fashion system. And look at the resources which flow into this. Have always flown into this. If you look at the most bone-breaking, poor, at the edge of poverty and extinction tribes, how much they invest in their own makeup, in their own totemistic self-articulation, into the graphic overlay on everything. This is so costly, and it must mean something, that it's a human universal. That graphic designer semiology is a human universal,
that's why the Yazidis of Kurdistan worship the peacock god. I think that's the most clever religion ever. It's really whoever put in the most cost should be divine, right?
People will say, well, we can be wasting all these resources on conspicuous consumption. I mean, imagine you go into a crowd. They're only naked bodies, natural naked bodies on a green rubber surface. How could you orient? How could any communication, selection of communication, but a situational distinction take place? So it is an idea of fashion is all a kind of consumerist kind of waste of time. Society couldn't function without it.
No, I totally agree. And then we put it in art museums 30 years later, recognize how fantastic it was, right? I was in the music industry, as you probably know, for 25 years before I became a full-on philosopher. So I really lived in the fashion world.
Sartorial, sophisticate, for all your life. I mean, if you see photos of me in my 20s, I mean, and the Madonna-styled self-transformations, that was a revolutionary period. That was a transition between these paradigms, and we had to kind of explore and experiment, not only the normal youth, self-finding thing. So I was kind of quite out there on the scene. So,
Yep. So I want to bring Owen in here because he brought us together after all today as well, with a more artistic perspective. And the question I have to Owen first, but then to you is, can we just explain parametricism and tectonism? I love both terms. And I want to know how you eventually then, Patrik, explain to me, Owen, how you developed from parametricism onto tectonism, where you're located now with the second book. But Owen, you met Patrik in London. That's how this conversation really got started, right?
Oh yeah. From our mutual friends, the Walkers, right? So funny. Dylan Walker is basically my childhood best friend. We've known each other since nursery, and Chuck, his father, is a longtime colleague of yours, right, Patrik?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So they had a lovely Christmas party, and I was sort of standing in the corner feeling slightly awkward and eating cheese. And then Chuck said, "Oh, you got to talk to Patrik." And
Chuck was an early protagonist of parametricism before it was called that. My role in this was basically kind of labeling and canonizing to give a hook for self-identification and a kind of principled stock taking to then accelerate on the basis of that. But he was definitely a protagonist.
Yeah, and it's super exciting because working where I'm sort of one of the companies I work with, doing a lot with ambient music, and then we're also doing basically an immersive improv theater company. Actually, the principles of parametricism come in very nicely there. Like, improv theater is all about setting basic parameters and then setting bodies into space to go and move around. And now we're starting to think about how you can use AIs to be playing with prompting and modulating lights or music in a space at the same time. And similarly, I mean, ambient music composition is all setting up these complex parameter digital instruments and then letting them run and flow and creating these ambient environments. I think one of the things, a good friend of mine, Alexander Daniel Fraga, who's also an architect by training, he's calling it ambient UX, which I quite like setting this very low level vibrational quality. And I was just looking at your book, Tectonism, Patrik, and looking at the shapes of Zaha, which honestly, before then, I hadn't really had much encounter with it. It was basically, Dylan's dad works for this funky architecture firm. And it's the first time I actually picked up and was looking into it. these designs look exactly like the sounds that I'm hearing and the sort of things we're trying to create artistically. And since then, that's why I was so hot on the books and went, okay, we've got to speak.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, you say UX, I say UX, UI. This is basically also a great metaphor and analogy where we should look at every designer's work. You know, the built environment is the user interface for us to interact and communicate like this. This is literally the UI, UX, and architects, but UI, UX professionals and designers also for the physical world. Because in the end, the physical world, at this stage, you know, and Luhmann points out, most of the productivity gains, nearly all of the productivity gains, are in information processing, knowledge exchange, knowledge innovation, and the physical drudgery, you know, is on the way out. I mean, in agriculture, it's 1%, but it's really robotic tractors who scan and calibrate, and all the productivity gains are developed in the biogenetic labs, feeding the next generation of super tractors, super fertilizers, etc., etc. So the same if you look at images of factories now, there's nobody there. All the workers are information workers. They're just checking, controlling, and reprogramming the robots. And so that's this information knowledge economy society, and that's where communication and interfacing, developing communication interfaces. The physical world is a huge communication interface. You know, to keep innovating so that you can reprogram the robots, redevelop software service, upload, and you know what strikes me was, for me, is very important, the innovation absorption capability of this techno-industrial systems we have now compared to the 1950s Fordist. The Fordist was hugely productive. 60 million people all having a kind of standard of living, flowing water, telephone, and television with one channel, then two, you know, packaged holidays, washing machine, and industrialized foods and clothes. That's who I grew up in the 60s. Great, wonderful. Nobody wants to live like this, 9 to 5, but no much communication requirements, huge corporate bureaucracies where you slot in 9 to 5 and no much lateral communication, no much innovation. Because these production runs, million of the same, and now you can upload. Everybody can work on innovation because it pays. You upload the next app, software service, and billions of people. It can enhance reprogramming, 3D printing, also the physical production. So that absorption of innovation means it pays to innovate, and we should all be in R&D, marketing, financing. Everything becomes a project. Nothing is just. And that's the post-Fordist thing. And the internet is a huge kind of accelerator, use factor of that, but it's not the only and primary factor. But we haven't adapted to this world politically fully. I mean, Thatcher Reagan was a huge positive boost, unleashing all these shackles, you know. But it was also right that the socialists foresaw that the previous era, the Fordism, when you had 5,000 steel companies condensing into 3. 5,000 banks condensing into 3, etc., etc. When this was happening, that you can then, these huge planned corporate bureaucracy who are also cartelizing and planning already under capitalism, that you can take that over and run a socialist modernization program. Wasn't as good as the capitalist. That, you know, so I'm saying kind of the socialism had a chance during Fordism. It had to collapse during post-Fordism, or what you call informationalism. They didn't even allow, not only for restrictiveness, they didn't allow you to Xerox, use a Xerox machine, but also because this was central planning. If you can plan an economy with 5 products, you know, the house, the washing powder, you know, but you cannot, plan an economy with 5 million, a swarm of 5 million continuously mutating products. And
well, we had a name for that when bureaucrats wanted to be entrepreneurs. It was called the Soviet Union, and it collapsed for a very good reason. And it's been the case ever since antiquity. When bureaucrats think they're innovative,
the competitive collapses, right? Disadvantage in the 50s was small. And when this transformation happened, the gap the abyss opened and they had to perish. So, and you can see, I mean, it's not it's Thatcher, Reagan, Deng Xiaoping, Yeltsin, etc., etc. And then you have then you have North Korea and some other places, the last Mohicans who don't get it, or descended into, let's say, look at Venezuela, Argentina descending into the wrong kind of running against the arrow of history into self-destruction. By the way, do you love Milei? Javier Milei? Are you thrilled?
I am thrilled about Milei, to be honest about it. But I'm a libertarian, a Marxist libertarian like yourself. So, and I also know that Argentina had no choice. Milei basically said, at least when it comes to getting the economy right, which is the number one question in politics after all, then Pinochet did a good job in Chile, but he was a horrible dictator who killed a lot of people. So I'm going to do what Pinochet did without being horrible and nasty. I'm going to do exactly what he did for Argentina and finally get the ball rolling. And the irony is that while Trump is raising all these trade barriers everywhere, which are not going to work out for Trump. I mean, the problem is he's a Peronist. Trump is the Peronist today, but he's actually now doing a free trade negotiation with Argentina. The irony is total. I mean,
I love that.
Completely reversed. Canada and Argentina have totally switched roles here, right? So I find that fascinating, to be honest about it. Argentina, and by the way, don't you expect to be building things in Buenos Aires in, say, 5 years' time? Isn't that exactly where you're going to be in 5 years' time?
Look, there's still residues of entrepreneurship, so we have something going up in Buenos Aires already.
I've seen your buildings that you designed for Prospera, because I'm Prospera a lot in Roatan. So
I mean, yeah, that's been shut down. Again, they don't get it. Latin America is kind of shifting left. It's been kind of oscillating, crazy mood swings and oscillations. And Honduras went left, and they're trying to shut down. I mean, which is an amazing experiment.
No, actually, to be honest, that's switching around because Xiomara Castro, the leftist president, is down below 20% opinion polls. She needs to win an election this fall. So Prospera is actually kind of happening. It's very unstable, that's true. And it's built like a network they can move. But Prospera has the potential to become a Singapore for Central America. That's
of course, like look what Bukele is doing. I mean, it's also stunning. So. Yeah, by the way, but I'm not sure if I should go back. Let's say very briefly on the parametricism front.
Yes, please.
Parametricism and tectonism. So basically what I'm saying is parametricism is the epochal style of, let's say, use your phrase, informationalism. And everything had to be radically readapted methodologies. And also you need to use all these new tools as well. But it's also the context of what's required, the dynamism of cities, complexity, integration, interaction, intervisibility, and self-transformation, rapid transformation, agglomeration, no central planning, no long-term, super long plans, and all of that architecture, but also all the other design disciplines had to adapt to this, mass customization, economies of scope instead of mass mechanical reproduction, industrial design, everything had to, fashion instead of kind of, 5 years of X and 5 years of Y, the proliferation of the diversification. So all the designers had to adapt. And parametricism is that methodology, that paradigm, that epoch. And I'm using the phrase paradigm as well, which is obviously coming from the sciences. But I'm also saying, hey, I want to use the concept of style because traditionally that's a genuine concept out of, let's say, the arts and crafts, the design disciplines, architecture. And this concept aligns with socioeconomic epochs. So I'm saying this is a new epochal style. And it emerged, and my theory is like this. So you had modernism as being the epochal style aligning with Fordist, this kind of capitalist phase, and applies equally to the socialist version of Fordism. Again, technology is primary. You could have political correspondences, a kind of capitalism, which, for instance, in Britain was anyway largely centrally planned and nationalizing lots of industries, slightly less so in the US, but still you had the New Deal, you had Roosevelt, you had the government coming in heavily and regulating, and so on and so forth. So these are variants of the Fordism. Modernism became a global spread around the whole planet. Everything, I mean, it took a while. It took, it started in Germany and the German-speaking nations, Austria, Switzerland, etc., in the 20s. Britain came on in the 30s. and then US came on in the 30s, but really after the Second World War, it spread everywhere. And
you got the Oscar Niemeyers of the world. I mean, Brazil,
everywhere around
India,
Africa,
South Africa,
India.
everywhere.
I mean, also they have global firms like Le Corbusier building Chandigarh in India. Look, I mean, of course, the British Empire helped; it was still there. All construction in Africa of any note was modernist. So in et cetera, et cetera. So that was one paradigm, and then you had the 70s, and you had the collapse of socialism in Britain. You had hyperinflation. You had a lot of worries that some of these greenfield sleeping cities and let's say workers ghettos and all this wasn't working anymore. You have the urban renaissance. You have starting to see the next phase, this kind of post-Fordist things happening, and then architecture reacted with postmodernism. Basically, it was collage. There's the theorist who wrote The Language of Postmodern Architecture, Charles Shanks, had an earlier book 5 years earlier, which was, and that's in the mid-70s, the postmodernism book, Ad hocism, the celebration of collage, of bricolage, the raw accumulation of free interventions and entrepreneurship, not a centrally planned, orderly. And then it moved from there. So it was, and postmodernism was literally influenced by pop art and collage.
Yes.
And they're using historical motives. They was about re-inhabiting the historical city. They realize it's not kind of scarcity. You need pedestrian dense zones, etc. And they're played with historical motives, but pop. And then this kind of free, but there were all those new moves, intersecting things, collaging, layering things, old onto new, etc. And then deconstructivism stripped it of these historical constraints and motives, and they went more abstract and with systems overlapping, collaging, going to the Russian constructivist. You do any sources, and then this was already, these are called now transitional styles. Each of them was running for 10, 15 years. And then what I personally witnessed all of this because I was brought up on modernism. The late in the mid 80s was still the kind of lingering university modernism. Then I discovered postmodernism. That's kind of wild discourse with a lot of theory in out of America. Then I saw Zaha happening and deconstructivism being announced. I was in the midst of this at Tate. It was in Britain, Tate Britain. They announced a conference anticipating the MoMA show. It was happening. But I realized, so it seems strange. Every few years there's something new. Minimalism came also in there in the early 90s, going back to modernism after postmodernism reaction. It was all over the place. Neo-historicism, some of the postmodernists went into literally traditionalist King Charles kind of Dorset, cutie town, because that was the element that was popular. So it was all over the place. And then
it's like when you ask people what kind of architecture they love, they always say 1895 Paris. They all want the same gaslights everywhere.
And the celebration of the chaos of Tokyo. Japan, of course, you look towards this takeoff of a super potent economy. And what does the city look like? It looks like this kind of spill, this huge collage, the thrill of chaos visually. Anyway, when we're coming to that, the experience we had, so it really started in the early 90s. When we had done these kind of superpositions, we used Xerox machines to stretch things. We had these kind of collage and deconstructivist compositions. And then there was the computational revolution. We discovered, let's say, computer graphics. Some people was pioneered, they learned about, the way animation industry, sort of tools where you can do more and explore more formal universes. Then you have Deleuze coming in and talking about smooth space versus striated space, fluid, nomadic, abstract machine methodologically. You just generate and proliferate graphic structures. It's not kind of form follows function, but it's a heuristics of generating and proliferating form, like mutation and then selection for new.
This is what we call ecotopianism, so we don't have to use the environmentalism word, because that's being completely destroyed.
What this was like. And that was so stunning. It spread like wildfire to some elite universities. Because we were in Columbia University, Harvard University at the time. From one year to another, everybody switched and was on board. The whole school went digital, paper models out. The AA was teaching, the oldest university of London. Not all out, but like 60% onto this. Then came others, Harvard followed, SciAc followed, many others following. And it was really a whole generation, literally, taking off. And that was this moment. And I realized 10 years in, I'm like, hey, we're still having the same principles. We're still having these foundations. We're just working it through all scales, all program forms. We're starting to see how technical systems fit in there. And by the way, the scientific revolution, engineering, finite element analysis, topological optimization, so genetic algorithms, evolutionary processes, all of that helped in technically. How do you create apertures and openings? How do you organize and partition such structures, open-ended meandering structures? So we worked through. Eventually, Deleuze and the philosophers went into the back of the shelf and the software manuals, and because we've rehearsed it so many times, we knew what we were doing. Now let's do it. And we moved into architects led the whole kind of robotics manufacturing arena. We looked at how to realize this. Engineering, we developed all these plugins, architects reading scientific papers and running plugins for this kind of world of Grasshopper graphic coding. You don't code like this, you plug and play in the graphic interface your stream of algorithmic loops and subloops and so on and so forth. That world took over. And when this was quite advanced, let's say 15 years in, it was clear this wasn't like small shifts. This was epochal. This was the whole generation. Then I said, okay, this means something more fundamental. This is it. I realized for 15 years, the same principles. I look back. There's a series of principles we've always adhered to, a series of moves and methods and primitives we've never touched. So I was trying to canonize what we have been doing retrospectively, and that's where I've used. This needs a label. I was banding about for a label, and I came up with this idea of parametricism because every element is parametrically malleable, and the more parameters of responsiveness, the better. Then the principle of all these systems are internally differentiated. It's not one repetition, but one is kind of proliferating in variations and across ranges of scale and transformation, but they still have the same genotype, phenotype. So every system differentiated. And then systems correlate. In deconstruction, we're just collaging them. They remain in there. No reaction, no responsiveness, no integration, no. And I said as many correlate and resonate with many other systems, and you have the tools. Parametric models are basically network of dependencies. You change something here, it radiates and ricochets. Everything is readapting.
It's kind of you bend the building and you get all the data on what the additional costs would be, different materials would be, how longer or shorter it would take to build, whatever. You get all the data, so you could basically just focus on the aesthetics or something like that. Whereas everything else is just flow down. Right?
I mean, it's hyper-functional still. Eventually, of course, the heuristics of mutation and finding, you can't deduce let's say function, a form from function, but you can obviously evolve a form putting selection containts and use evolutionary algorithms. And what I've been recently, so we now tectonism is basically the next stage where we're loading in much more engineering constraints. We can pre-constrain the tools so that whenever you play around with them and they adapt to complex sites, complex internal compositions, but they will always be, for instance, minimal surfaces if you decided on that system, or developable and constructionable, or they always track some constraints because you have so much degrees of freedom, they can constrain some of them so that they're already optimal, and then you play intuitively with the rest and tease out. And so it was tectonism in the end, a hyper engineering logics, fabrication logics, environmental engineering, structural engineering, and for me as well in Parametricism 2.0, focusing now on social functionality. So we have these systems, and we are designing this idea of channeling and framing crowds and interactions. So we have agent-based models, which are moving through and are captured and channeled and rechanneled and cajoled and broken up and measured out. We have the final occupancy processes in the model. And so because that's no longer intuitively graspable, so that's another innovation.
So you're adding anthropology to directly into
absolutely
architecture.
directly into it, and we're trying semiology, of course. What I call my research project is called agent-based parametric semiology as one of the research, and of course I'm taking all the technological morphologies you love so much. It's like the endless form of nature, but the endless form of nature are hyper following behaviors of nature, to pick up your phrase, not just quasi laws of nature, but we can also invent more, because these kind of, if you had dependency relations, correlations, they also allow inference potential. So you're not confronted with the garbage spill where there's no correlation, no learning, no orientation, but you can, on the one hand, the real laws of nature or behaviors of nature are imprinted, or sociological laws or criteria are imprinted and responded to and picked up. But you also can additionally generate resonances and laws which are more for the sake of orienting, that you can infer, that you have an information-rich environment which you can read and be empowered by, so that all the offerings of all these wonderful offerings of thousands of interaction potentials when you're in a mixed-use complex, that you actually find them, that you're not like, you're not kind of menaced by overload, but that you're kind of easygoing and lovely and intuitively grasp, and one thing leads to another and you infer. But also what you need, of course, the total freedom of, on the end user side, to find each other, to self-sort, self-organize. You need all these freedoms. The planners must be.
That's where AI comes in. I mean, AI is a dream for anybody who's done the organizational theory, which you obviously have done too, and you do best practice. So the problem with best practice is that it takes months or even years before people figured out that somebody's figured out a better way of doing things than the one you assumed before, right? So then people go back to best practice. The thing I worked with robotics in Japan this last year. That was fantastic, because the only thing we needed to do really was to plug all the different robots that were interconnected with the largest possible network around the world, industrial robots, that with any one of these industrial robots run into a problem, and then the problem could be solved, the solution to the problem was then solved whenever that problem occurred in any robot anywhere in the world from then on. So the trick is that best practice will now become so implemented. So I would imagine, if you're an architect, you don't even know how many new materials have been discovered over the last 24 hours that your computer now has access to. You don't even know. So your computer with an AI will, of course, suggest to you that certain new materials being invented could actually be cost efficient and really beautiful and perfect for exactly what you're trying intuitively to create.
I mean, what the tragedy is, so just to, tectonism is just a subsidiary style within parametricism. We don't talk about a new paradigm shift. It's just
tectonism is your ism. It's the ism. Parametricism is a framework. Yes.
My theory of styles, let's say, of paradigms, and it's also something, I guess, it could be writ large, is this, that we have epochal styles, and then we have subsidiary styles. So, for instance, when the epochal style of, let's say, historicism, you have neoclassicism, neo-Gothic. It went through all of them, neo-Baroque, and then it moved into another. I mean, they were similar. They worked as a system also. But then you have eclecticism, which is kind of something new. Anyway, then you have in around 1900, you have a transitional styles before modernism takes off for another 60, 70 years. You have Art Nouveau for 10 years. You have Expressionism for 5 years. So they're trying. This is the revolutionary period of paradigm shift. You're trying different situations, different things. Similar with the same thing of a hierarchy of epochal and subsidiary would apply to the great epochs. Capitalism had a series of subsidiary stages. And so the similar with parametricism, which is now going on for nearly 30 years. Actually, the early beginnings were 92, 93. So we're over. You have subsidiary styles. There was, what I call foldism. That was originally called folding in architecture. Then we had these blobs and fusing and so on. We had blobism. Then we had swarms of elements, swarmism, and then tectonism is a major move forward. Like in modernism, you had the white modernism of the 20s, then you had brutalism of the 30s, 40s, 50s, then you had high-tech, metabolism and high-tech, etc., etc. They're subsidiary styles, but they're bound together by a set of principles which work across all of them. And similarly, there's a set of principles. The principles are formulated under the heading of Parametricism in 2008. Tectonism adheres to all of them, yet it has a series of new individual features within that, not violating the principles of Parametricism. So that, for me, this hierarchy is important. Just to close off on that, and I used a new phrase, and I kept saying tectonism, the latest stage and most advanced stage of parametricism, because we haven't shifted into another epochal transformation. We're still trying to work through the post-Fordist network society, and we had these kind of privatization sprees and neoliberalism, and then once we're kind of out of the worst and get somewhere, retrenchment. Labour Party will be coming back in, of course, not going all the way back, but trying to, there's this kind of tug of war, and it's only the next stage when Milei shows the way and Doge kind of does something and Reform learns from that, and you have serious libertarians, Austrian economist-inspired libertarians in Reform. You also have them in the Conservative Party, by the way. There's some serious. I've been working with think tanks like the Adam Smith Institute and the Institute of Economic Affairs. They always had, all the libertarians were somehow hidden in the Conservative parties. And then when kind of what the lady who kind of had that 10-week stunt, she was out of this. She had
Liz Truss,
and Kwasi Kwarteng. Actually, I love these guys. They had such bad luck. I mean, it was tragic. They didn't know what was going on, but I love that. I mean, I said, this kind of cut of the top right, it was just a signal. It was a signal, hey, we're going to bust this thing up. Take 45 down to 40. Yes. They were out in 10 weeks. By the way, Kwasi Kwarteng is also a great character. It's a shame. Bloody noses.
Sorry, I'm just going to ask you this one thing, Patrik. Yeah. Owen can rhyme in here as well, because an artist, depending on where your feed comes from, the mecenate or whatever. So the question is this. We have seen architecture move around the globe quite a lot in the last 50 years because money has moved somewhere else. And to me, Europe is sclerotic, old, endless bureaucracies, environmental courts, whatever. Things go on forever. And somebody finds a little bird somewhere in the corner, you can't build anything. It's just dead. It's just boring and dead. And I travel around the world. I love India. I go to India every year. I work there a lot. I tour India. My books are doing well. I just love India because they're building like shit. They're building tons of shit everywhere. And of course, China did that before them, even more so. And the question is, where do you see going forward as an architect when you take your theory into practice? Where will you have commissions for people coming through the door and say, we really want your tectonism. We want you to build something extraordinary, maybe with some local flair added to it, but we wanted you to build tectonic architecture. Where would that happen?
Yeah, well, the clients, on the client side, we're doing well. We have projects all around the world, and we find our way, and we're super popular in China. We have major followers, and some of my students are the top firms in architecture in China and in India, etc.
I met you guys over here in Sweden, Norway, because Norway is planning
right.
extravagant.
So we're doing well enough as
the motorway along the Norwegian coast for electric cars. You're obviously involved in that project already. So I met you guys here.
No, we're doing well enough as a firm, and the world is large, and we find these. What is really, but for this to take off, the tragedy is that the discipline is dysfunctioning. That the discipline has been kind of taken over, usurped, swamped, distracted. You name it. And particularly the discipline on the cultural side, we have universities are washout, all the biennales, conferences, magazines are disappeared. It's a craft, as I said. It's reverted back to a craft-like tradition-bound building, kind of, bereft of theory. What's actually going on? Because the theorists and critics and discourse, they look at something else, nothing to do with what we're building, the leading architects, what the projects are, what's happening. They look away and then they want to look at leftover, the marginal, I mean, it's really tragic. And in the professional discourse, you're quite right. There is obviously professional conferences. It's a sustainability thing, which has been. It's not that I'm not a climate change denier, but first of all, yes, there's these exaggerations where I was sitting in the all-parliamentary.
It's the laziness of the whole thing. It's this constant repetition of the cliche.
I mean, it's just taking over.
Look, it's too easy. These people who say sustainability don't mean it. It means
first of all, it's just an easy thing, and my main problem is it takes up so much airspace. Of course, massive diminishing returns at this point when 99% or 90%, let's say, of all conferences, of all meetings and lectures and so on are focusing on this. How much new things can you learn there when you actually, swamping the discourse, because this is only on the cost side. This is only talking about side effects and costs you need to get maintained under control. It says nothing. If you have so wonderful sustainability kind of, let's say, technologies, you taking the positive goals and what the built environment needs to become that agile interface and help us boost productivity and freedom and development. They say absolutely nothing about this. You leave that totally untouched because the benefit side, the positive goal setting, and how do we deliver to those purposes and goals? Because if you're only looking at the constraint, minimize carbon footprint, the only conclusion is don't build at all. So it doesn't tell you how.
Exactly. We cannot have a car accident. We cannot have car accidents and so all cars must stop.
Yeah,
the whole point with having cars has disappeared, right?
So basically, but the implicit thing is, of course, that we know what the benefits are, we know what the positive goals are, we know what the solutions look like, how to deliver to these goals. Everything is taken for granted. That means its own conservative, frozen in some kind of states. We just know what we're supposed to build. Now we're just building it carbon footprint cheaper. And that's the huge fallacy. It presumes that everything is fixed, eternal, and there's no innovation on the side. Well, I am looking at.
I haven't thought of that. It's the Platonic forms coming in through the back door. You couldn't be more opposed to Deleuze and Luhmann than this. You couldn't be more opposed to it than that. It's just ridiculously boring. It's tragic.
And look, we are one firm. We are drop in the ocean. We have and we have still some research. Let's say the original protagonists, my generation who went into this in 30 years ago, some of them fell off, but the hardcore is there, and we keep deepening, we have learning, but there's this ever thinner sliver because there's no fresh blood, hardly fresh blood coming in, because all the fresh blood is going kind of into anti-capitalist kind of,
Here's the thing. The thing with architecture, as the beloved emergent sector we're talking about here, is that architecture is by necessity heroic. It's by necessity heroic. You're going to design and build a building. It's going to have purposes, and it will surprise you along the way. It will suddenly have purposes you never even thought about. Right? Absolutely. That's that. So it's heroic. It's deeply heroic. And the problem with all this culture, this politicization that came in the last 50 years, was that it's completely victimhood cults. And a victimhood cult crushing with the heroic, if the victimhood cult takes over, nothing will be built, more or less. And if anything is built, it's nothing but a really bland repetition of the same again, with maybe slightly lower carbon footprint or something like that. It's just
look, exactly. Look, all these kind of gold, platinum certified buildings, they look exactly the same as any other building, and particularly when you focus on embodied carbon, this is just selecting. Basically, another thing I'm saying, this is totally engineering-led as well. So architects become amateur engineers if they allow that to prioritize their work. And I'm making the distinction, engineering is technical functionality. Architecture is directly with the client social functionality. The engineers need to execute and optimize for cost and minimizing material cost, carbon footprint cost, economic costs, help us what the purposes and life we want to construe, the interfaces we want to build, the dynamics of social dynamics and forms of sociality and co-production of life and prosperity. That's what we need to figure out along the categories of, spatiology, phenomenology, semiology, dramaturgy. That's social functionality. And then the technical functionality. Since this severing out, this distillation and separation, division of labor is relatively recent. I mean, it started in the 19th century with engineering versus architecture, but I was still brought up semi-engineer. Architecture schools are plugged into engineering schools, TUs, technical universities, etc. But it's now so fully severed out. We don't even design any technical element, let's say even internal surfaces, how they're fixed to the wall, is we bring an engineer on everything, facade included, everything. So all we are left with, our actual contribution responsibility, is for that last millimeter of surface, what it meets your eye, the phenomenology of the built environment, everything below the hood, like with designers. Interaction designer is not designing the hardware behind this. Let's say behind that surface, behind that screen, everything is engineering. On that screen, everything is designers, my colleagues. And the discourse is very, very different.
Car design works exactly the same way.
Exactly. Every
Exactly
time.
the same way.
Fashion, you have tailors and you have fashion designers who have no clue. They couldn't put the garment together. So, but we should appreciate this, because it distills out what we're in charge of. The problem is that architects, they're not articulate about. It's harder to talk about the constraints and social functionality processes and innovate on that front rather than in a random way, in a strategic way. Therefore, when they want to, and a lot of this is still intuitive. I'm working on making this intuitive, let's say, trackable and reproducible and criticizable through.
But this is what we have in common.
The architects, so when they're under pressure,
the architect, the artist, and the philosopher in this conversation,
the architect,
intuition is driving the whole thing.
But it doesn't have to. I think every intuition has an underlying law of rationality you can tease out and extract, and like AI, it shows us. But the architects, they're in the headline of evidence-based. You have to be rational, can't be intuitive, have to make proper arguments. So they revert back into engineering, but it's the only firm ground where they feel they can say something which has evidence underpinning it. They're at sea. They're lost. Now, the problem is this field over the last 30 years, in the one hand, we have this movement, but the last 15 years has kind of gone off and has reverted to debating clubs, art schools, you name it. By the way, I have a theory of art which I think is absolutely necessary for contemporary society or modern society to have an art world, but it functions very, very, very different from a design enterprise. We're feeding off it. It's the mutation chamber, the freewheeling brainstorming chamber. But what's the point of brainstorming if you don't then select, cash out, elaborate, and evolve? And what the problem is this: you have the discipline is remaining on the one hand, the debating club on the other hand. They're never stepping out of the brainstorming into the translation, into the shake out and reading out. So you have 30 years of brainstorming. I mean, that becomes a running idle, for the last 50 years. So it's a huge tragedy, because we can't do it on our own. We need a critical mass. I'm not saying the whole of the discipline, but we need a critical mass, at least 50%, or at least, let's say, 30%, and then 50 and 40, 60 and 70 coming in. You always need mavericks and others, counter paradigms, to continue to search, to feed. But what we have now, if you have kind of 3% or 1%, I mean, we can't do all the heavy lifting with this kind of diminishing sliver. So that's why I have to go out. We're doing well as a company, but we're a drop in the ocean. I want the discipline to come around, and I'm becoming increasingly aggressive. Every year the Biennale, I have to rip in deeper. I have to become more polemic. I hate to be polemicist, and I have to kind of ramp up my rhetoric, and we have to be less forgiving, because it's a tragic waste, of the whole of the built environment, meaning that we're all losing out. We're all missing everything. We're running down dead corners. We can't find anything. Nothing is working. And also nothing in the political paralysis is massive as well. We need to shake up the politics of this. Political planning paralysis, I mean, it's literal happening. I mean, I'm sitting on this all-party parliamentary commission on, leveling up infrastructure, housing, and so on, and development. And they're sitting the investors who want to bring money and saying, we can't bring the money. We have developers who want to build. They say planning paralysis, everything is stopped. We have some think tanks. So
this is in the UK, 2025.
The UK, yeah. And we have architects saying we can't do anything. And literally there's still something going on, but London should be soaring. It should be the fastest growing city in Europe, which it was and is to some extent, but people are pushed to the outskirts, they're squeezed into flat shares. I mean, imagine my people, my professional workers who need to be there on weekends and lights and deliver, and they're sharing a flat in former social housing thing, and they're living in the kitchen, sharing the decrepit toilet and shower. I mean, they're living like worse than students live in.
And you just left London, didn't you? Yeah.
I was living like this till age 40. I tell you, I was living in Brixton in a converted kitchen, sharing the toilet with some kind of whatever people who were partying when I had to work.
Yeah, no, I got out, but where I am now in a little place in Essex called Leigh-on-Sea, it's really interesting. It's got this Renaissance town vibe because there's lots of financiers and lots of artists.
But you're not in the midst of it. For instance, for some of our people,
yeah.
I mean, of course, now Zoom and so on helps, but it's look, if I don't go to the office, at least three afternoons a week, I'm losing out so badly, because otherwise I'm just doing the few scheduled meetings which my PA is putting in my calendar, and whoever comes to me, I have to roam around. Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? What is this? They come to me. I mean, this is yet irreplaceable. The metaverse which I'm working on will substitute some of this. But hey, man, you sitting out there. I mean, if during COVID, some employees moved out, find it hard to come in, they miss out on everything. The evening sessions and debates we have at the office, the pub afterwards, the opening of the show, in walking distance at the AA or Barbican or XYZ. The meetings face to face and the engineers which all cluster there. We need to, in this environment, everybody in the knowledge economy needs to recalibrate what they're doing with respect to what many or all others are doing continuously. If you sit there and work for 4 weeks on this, and you hadn't heard about the new update, the new AI, and you're using the old tool, or you haven't seen the latest project your colleagues have been doing, you are literally wasting your time. So you can't do this. I mean, and if a lot of people who want to develop their career have to decide to either live like shit and in the center, or get a little bit of creature comfort, but they will stunt their careers. I mean, the economic costs of this planning paralysis are huge. But also, of course, all this other overregulation,
But this is the European disease, at least the Western European disease, right? Because I live in Scandinavia, it's probably not as bad as London, but almost as bad. So you have this planning paralysis they talk about, and politicians are talking about big infrastructure projects that never get off the ground. I mean, Heathrow, for God's sake, it's a fucking nightmare still.
I mean, it's amazing that the Labour Party by now is trying to say the third runner. I mean, they've been talking about the third runner for 50 years, and I had someone get up and say we once were invited and we designed for the sixth terminal, etc. And in the end, I realized in Europe, or certainly in Britain, or Germany, etc., there will never be another airport built. Full stop. But the problem is this. If you don't get direct flights to all these cities, it used to be 5 cities in China, now it is 25 cities. You would want to fly direct. I mean, this is again, it's like the costs, the kind of, so yeah, and that's why I think in this situation the metaverse gets another kind of leg up. Before they regulate it down, before they kind of throttle that. But you can substitute quite a bit, and there's free entrepreneurship, and we're building a kind of synergy cluster in the internet, which now becomes a kind of does so much more. It competes. The metaverse is going to be so huge. It on the one hand competes with all the physical venues more immediately than Zoom. That's why Zoom is invested in this, Microsoft invests, they all invest in this. But also, it substitutes for all the websites. And all the web traffic shifts. So it will take over both a large part of the built environment and a large part of the internet and converge. And then it also, of course, will be embedded in the physical world. I think we're going to not consume it on our laptop. I have a large screen here, larger and larger screens, collectively entering in caves within buildings. This kind of digital integration, I'll see that coming. I don't want us to all be sitting at home and just being kind of, But anyway, that's something, by the way, we're having Metrotopia, we're having a startup company. Again, I have to do it myself. Nobody else is doing the metaverse the way it should be done, could be done. And I also thought we have to wait for the network effects to kick in, then the avalanche will come. But I think I will kick that avalanche into motion.
Well, when you get the hologram, when you get the hologram is one of those things like AI. Now people understand AI is just beginning, right? Once the hologram is there, definitely, I totally agree with you. This will really explode. But I want to go back to that one question. So right now, if you look at the world map, where can you build as freely as possible? Where are you being respected as an innovative technologist and as an architect?
Really nowhere.
Where are you given a free hand? When somebody tells you, please design something that will be striking on the map for a long time.
I tell you, this moment is no longer there to the fullest. It was 2007, before the meltdown. Dubai, crazy shit, China still at that time under Jiang Zemin. I mean, we had clients, these entrepreneurs in China, real estate entrepreneurs were the heroes. But there were also radical innovations. For instance, they put up these buildings, forget planning, forget any preconceived notion which of these units will be used for residences, which one will be used for offices, work environments, which one will be used for retail environments. So you have the building and they're springing up the hair salons, the nail salons, the restaurants, the bars, the residences, the offices, co-working on the ground. I mean, we have these wonderful projects. I mean, this is China 15 years ago. They've been becoming more, they have lots of opportunity and they're doing big urban. So we want the master planning and so. But they want kind of green campus feel, Stanford rolling out, technopoles, but it's no longer what it was. India, maybe. The Middle East, yes, to some extent still. But you have to deal with MBS.
I was just going to say India and Indonesia, but I guess they're not really paying for aesthetics at the moment. They're just basically doing copying or something they've seen in America or China.
We're doing pioneering work. We're doing innovative work. You need to have risk-taking capability. Costs are not as easily predictable. In parametricism, tectonism, in the end, these buildings will be cheaper because you can reduce concrete, steel, all these material and use information to substitute for material, and you get more running costs down and you get more efficiency benefits. So there will be much better in the cost benefit analysis, better high profitability, high performance product. But there's a risk element at this point. The whole industry isn't fully geared up. And there's not enough kind of, let's say, track record which to give trust. So unfortunately, there's been also kind of slightly, there's no territory which is as great an adventure and potential as 15 years ago, China. Unfortunately, China has moved in the wrong direction to some extent. It's still great. And then Saudi came up. Saudi is all over the place. It's you get a lot of opportunities, but the process of selection, it's just one guy saying, I like this. And it's funny the way MBS is kind of putting out these he loves cyberpunk. He loves video games and sci-fi. So he literally, the briefing documents is all these kind of cyberpunk style catalog. We don't want to work like this. On the one hand, on the other hand, they have all these kind of historical affiliations where you have to have, Salmani style, this and that and that. So anyway, it's still a wonderful territory, the boldness. Of course, but it's economically, there's not enough economically check and balances. So the generalization of this, because let's say the line is not going to be an economic proposition.
No, of course, this could all change politically. If there would be peace, Russia, Ukraine.
But anyway,
if the mullahs of Iran would fall, and if Millet succeeds, we would have whole new arenas where probably great architecture would build
exactly
together.
That. And US, getting back into the US, in some of the states, there's energy now of capital flowing in. The Taiwanese kind of giant Apple, etc., investing and etc. We would love. For us, the ideal project would be Google Campus or something. The problem was this: we pitched it a number of times. the Palo Alto campus or the Mountain View campus 3 times, the New York campus. We never get to Larry Page or Sergey, where I said, okay, let me tell you. So they have these real estate managers and in-house architects, and they said, our headline is 0 carbon. Are you kidding? I mean, look, please. I mean, that's the virtue signal. That is maybe who cares how much carbon you save, but you kill the productivity potentials, which they don't see because they're looking at architectural discourse. It's all sustainability. That's the hot thing. That's where the innovation is. They don't know that they can, if you distribute, let me distribute 250 meeting rooms and 550 entrances for 25,000 people. Let me order them and let me run my agents models and let kinetic kind of adaptation, learning, robotic, architectural agents bring in the mix. Don't care what this costs because real estate costs are small. Salary costs and also the benefit of pushing out all these new apps to billions of people half a year earlier. The value of the real estate, the value of this investment, the kind of carbon you save is, forget it. It's a no proportion. So, but the problem is, can you bring me in front of these guys? I need to Zuckerberg and Musk and tell them what they need, because
they have switched. Zuckerberg has just switched.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. So we'll put in the word for you when we get access to them for sure, Patrik. We'll tell you that. Okay. Absolutely. Back to tectonism. So to go into where you're at now, besides the books, where you're at with the work on the specific subsidiary style of parametricism, tectonism, as you call it.
Well, that's what I said. So it was this, on the one hand...
The constraint is what I'm interested in. The constraint that enables the creativity.
Not only that, it's first of all, which is a great argument, is bringing all the engineering optimization in. What is interesting about this, first of all, it is literally optimization. You can save half the steel, etc. When it comes to brise-soleil elements and so on, you can optimize so you have, now you just make a curtain of the same, whether it's north, south, east, west, whether there's an overshadowing. So you can much more optimize, maintain much more transparency. You can also less, all these plant rooms, they pick up big bulks, which stop you from connecting. So, but more importantly, these endless forms of nature, which are coming out of these processes, the palette of articulation for the semiological project is so much more rich. And you have these kind of families of intersecting, let's say, the network of similitudes and contrasts, but they're not invented color codes. They're driven directly by the morphologies which are optimized, so they have more credibility. And you can hook onto this. Let's say if you go to the natural environment, it's not a garbage heap where nothing makes sense. You have a valley, where the river will be. You can see where the water coming from. You see the snow. You see that the north face is different from the south face. Where the vegetation, how these gradients, the flora, the fauna into the flora. So these environments are information rich. Everything depends on everything else. There's a dependency networks. There are laws of nature, inverted commas, or let's say behaviors of the principles of nature. Of course, they're not eternal laws of nature. They're also emergent patterns, which have to do with the ecosystems and eco niches, but it's lawful. That's where the city should be. That's where buildings should be. And the dumbest creatures in all these dumb kind of animals, they find their way. They find their prey. They find their nest. They refine their nest. So we're living in garbage spill. Nothing makes sense. And we can't infer anything from anything else. And that is a menacing and disorienting. And that means we're missing all the meetings. We're missing all the occasions. We have to stare at our blue.gps and therefore going only to pre-selected destination and don't notice anything else. So that is massively dysfunctional. And that's tectonism. So tectonism, ultimately, we are social functionality, but we now have this kind of tectonism that brings that engineering palette. There's a serendipitous or coincidence of, let's say, functions, refunctionalizing all that palette for the semiological and phenomenological project and, let's say, dramaturgic project. That's tectonism. So my tectonism, so tectonism again is the parametricism retrospective description of this evolved movement. Tectonism, again, the last 15 years, as I said, people went into fabrication technologies. They discovered engineering, they wrote the plugins, but they're not seeing the social functionality, refunctionalization of this. They're only seeing the technical part. So my element, innovation and proselytizing is great. All of this is wonderful. It convinces clients, and it's really saving both carbon footprint and real money and not wasting space. But it also makes things much more articulate. If you just have a grid of columns in a flat slab versus shells, which give you sense, hierarchy of primary, secondary, still intervisibility, all of this social functionality discourse, that's my story. That's only intuitive. I know a lot of the architects who are investing in these things that in the end, they also tease and love the originality and richness of the morphologies, but they can't articulate that love as rational because they don't realize that when I'm saying aesthetic values, we're navigating the world aesthetically. Inevitably, you can't calculate, and we're conditioned. It's basically conditioning. We're learning what to love, what not to love, what to avoid. It literally starts like
It's like when you walk out the door on a Sunday afternoon with your best friend and take a walk.
Go into a crowd.
The first thing you think is, where will I get inspiration? I want to walk to where I get inspiration, right? I'll avoid anywhere where I don't get
Let's say the
inspired.
complex field, an urban field with 150 destinations. Which club are you going to? What is it? And they know who they want to tease in, who they want to bring in. So they send out the markers, they send out these signals, and you get the signals. And when you go into a crowd, you know who you can talk to and who would be a waste of time talking to. And what are you into? And you also dress up how you want to be perceived, who you want to be approached up, if at all. If you're more kind of thrilling and you want to meet new people and this is kind of sexually kind of driven in that party, or whether it's more kind of networking driven or anything in between, you express that, and you should, because otherwise you have a terrible day, a terrible time. And also if you continuously pick up the wrong people, but also the environment needs to be versatile enough. You need to be able to meet lots of people, to rub along, but then you also need to have withdraw and have a prop where you can talk deeper. Then you should also be able to talk with a number of people. Then everybody needs to come together as well. The worst tale you have, we shouldn't waste our time. If you go to a conference or party and you're stuck on one table with 3 people you hate, and there's no chance, no move, no going over to another, but it's equally dissatisfying is 100 hellos and no beyond three words. Both of these parties are total waste of time. Then architecture has a lot to do with that. Architecture and anyway.
So this is what I brought up, anthropology, how you're connecting anthropology directly now to architecture. And because of AI, you can absolutely do that. You should do that as an architect. And I find it because in the world of anthropology is finally becoming a science, becoming data anthropology.
But AI,
about everything human beings do, can start sorting out patterns and see where attractors are and things like that. You will have tons of data anthropology storming into architecture.
We're developing a lot of algorithms and a lot of tools. And we're having a whole team on we every project we're training up new networks. But the other thing is this: on the frontier of innovation, AI is not so extremely helpful. Yes, in the recombination.
Not yet. But it will be.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me put it this way: parametricism is all over AI. I mean, AI, which is for me wonderful. If you just Google AI architecture, 70 to 80% is parametricism. If you look at the subtext, those who are saying tutorial, learn AI, learn how to prompt, this is, I would say, 95% parametricism. So parametricism, which doesn't exist out in the world, except the drop in the ocean, which we're delivering, and a few others, that's a great, so you can see all the desire where people want to be, if they could, have the opportunity and the skills, they're going to do it. However, tectonism, 0, because it's not out there. So they've been trained on we have thousands and millions of images out there and many other parametricism because, there's been around for 30 years. And there's another example. And if you put the right clues in, you can do it. and you also know that you intercept with natural forms, etc. You can, but tectonism has higher levels of rationality requirements. So we actually need to teach tectonism to AI ourselves at this point, and then we're doing this, and we can use it. But out there, just by itself, the big models, which they only can go by what they find out there. And tectonism has too many, I mean, they don't do structures properly. There are members missing, there are elements missing, the gradients. There is but
this is the case for any art form that works with constraints. Because AI does not have constraints at all, it just feeds data, right? So the trick is you always have to train the AI to do specific.
Of course, I'm using a lot of ChatGPT and so on, and I'm testing out. I'm testing them out with books I know. It's not as great. If you do it with books you don't know, wow, this seems to be fantastic. But if you there's a lot I get feedback about myself and my books and my writings and summaries and so on, but yeah, there's a lot of problems. But also when you're on the frontier, also what we want is so nuanced. And of course, how could you expect this to be hacked to it? So it's an 8. Once you've written the article, the abstract isn't too bad. But of course you have to go over it. So it's great, but I'm insisting still that it obviously can only work from what is out there. And if there's a density of discourse, but on the frontier where I want to push, there is not so much. But of course we do it. We are looking. I trained up my own AI with all my writings. It's doing better than the bland ChatGPT for sure. But I wanted to ask you, by the way, because I'm thinking about your books like Digital Libido, or your whole kind of theory of informationalism and what's your other phrase, attentionalism. What do you think about Pierre Levy and collective intelligence, and which was also interesting, the anthropology of cyberspace? You must have been aware of this. It came out in ’94 and then English in '97. I was quite influenced by it at the time.
Sure.
It's very similar. Yes. It's similar kind of periodization and
maybe, but I think the first I've written 6 books so far. Yes, I guess. Right. The first 3 books really are maybe in that realm, but not the 4th and the 5th and the 6th one. So the later ones are much more concentrated in the human constant, in the sense that humans haven't changed that much at all, and how we dialectically react to technological change. Which is why I'm writing on religion, theology. I'm writing on subcultures more than anything. And
can I ask you? Let me get. I've talked a lot, but I want to let you come back. Let's say I love when you say deep atheism. I'm the most explicit, and let's say I'm 1,000% certain that we should all be atheists. And to some extent, I love the Marxist kind of upfrontness and insensitivity with pushing that. No, but you're talking about rediscovering or recreating God, some kind of and I like the way you describe the religious as basically the Durkheimian way of God is representing community, everybody's dependence on society itself, but it is fully immanent and this worldly. So in your notion of God, is there anything otherworldly, or is just self-transcendence?
Well, the thing is that atheism applies on the past. God wasn't needed to create the world. There's no God there. There's no God to be found anywhere. But then we can reinvent theology. We just put it in the future. This is the thing with syntheology is basically saying that, well, actually, we are building technologies. We're building some kind of civilization. It goes back and forth. It could blow up at any given time. It could also survive for quite a few more 1,000 years, and amazing things could happen. So what kind of direction could we possibly apply onto it? And we don't have a word for that. And the word, why don't we borrow the word God and say we're working towards building
just
God?
Borrowing the word, just to say some kind of future, beautiful, imaginary community. You emphasize this.
No. But that's too concrete. it's much more abstract than that. But for example, in your case as an architect, see, the standard is the phallic skyscraper, right? In what way could you possibly reinvent the phallic skyscraper and build something extraordinary that stands the test of time, but it still has novelty when it arrives, right? So the thing is that you need a direction. It's like you put a point where somewhere up there in the future, like upwards and forward. And then you throw something in that direction, it sticks, and then you pull in that direction, and suddenly on the way, there's the phallic skyscraper. That's the point we're doing theology today. It's doing like, let's imagine just a direction upward, forward that we can go towards. And therefore, suddenly along that path, we can start inventing new ways of doing phallic skyscrapers, etc.
Is that
Temples,
a
theaters, the kind of things that I'm into in architecture, temples and theaters and opera houses, but the cultural constructs are different kinds. What would they be like in the future, right?
What's the, let's say, it's a strategic, rhetorical, or semantic move, right? And what are you trying to, I'm just trying to guess. Let me try that. Is that something where you want to energize people more, to be more kind of explorative?
Why do you think my books are popular in Silicon Valley with the Platonist there? They get, when a synthesis book came out, Waymo called, and what do Waymo want to do?
But let's
we want
say,
to build God instead of building self-driving cars. No, stop it. Not
but,
you.
But
you guys can't do that. You build the devil if you build anything. But
is it more utopian?
Thank you for being inspired, right?
Is it more socio-utopian, or is it more personal, revelatory, spiritual self-discovery? Let's say I know there's a few people, and I'm working in this mega book, and I put down a nearly empty final chapter, spirituality, and I'm looking, so I hadn't, and I have a place for poetry, by the way. That's kind of mutation machine and heuristic kind of language through metaphor exploration, but the spirituality. So let's say Sam Harris has this kind of thing, atheist spirituality. Then you have Jordan Peterson. Where is he going with this kind of?
He's boring. He's neo-Christian. He's just returned.
Help me. I will go more into syntheism. Now, is there any trace of this otherworldly or supernatural? Probably not.
No. This is the thing. If you think of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and those guys, they are now finally going utopian and allow themselves to go utopian, be creative on form. What I'm doing is that I'm doing the same thing with the content. And this is why I work with Owen. Because Owen is one of the most formidable young artists I met. He's just doing great work, and he's like me. He can't go into something unless he can change the medium while he's doing it. I became a record producer because I wanted to create the world's first totally electronic music studio without any acoustics whatsoever. And I did it. So I can't go into anything unless I also change the medium. That kind of meta creativity is what I'm interested in, Owen. That's why we work so tightly together, because I'm interested. I see the same with you, doing the same thing with architecture. You cannot avoid being a theorist on architecture before you become an architect. Because you cannot do architecture unless you change the very conditions of architecture itself while you're doing it.
So then let's say, what's the role, let's say, of, you also have a lot of references into sexuality and, that dynamic and drive, which is really deep and possibly annoying and might get in the way with some of the let's say, the more kind of missionary zeal-driven projects you might have. But I also, and you're talking about chemical liberation, which I experienced, and I think it was very positive.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey,
psychedelics is beginning to have an effect on architecture, isn't it? It's all over the place in arts, right? Because we're looking for sources of inspiration all the time. We are all three creative.
And also you want to unlock your all the resources. It's like anabolics in sport. Let's say anabolics for mental interesting mind expansion. So I'm into all of that, but I need to kind of I might have to dig deeper whether I want to write the spirituality chapter. I have some ideas, but how is it? Because I do think we are animated. Look, we're talking a lot about incentives, and to some extent, it's interesting. For instance, you're talking about attentionalism, right?
Yeah.
And why we seek this attention. My sense of our anthropology, a kind of deep sense of philosophical anthropology, there's two things. On the one hand, I deeply believe that material security and knowing that the creature comfort's going to be there, and I'm not going to be stranded and disconnected. But also we have some social, but that's very deep. And if I seek attention and if I seek honor and all these positive motivations which are not base material money, I mean doing it to be recognized. I want to be loved, but it's also isn't deep below that also the kind of material safety which comes with this.
Sure. Capitalism is there.
They're safe. They will always be safe. I don't know if that's coming into it.
No, attentionalism is a difficult word, but attention is a difficult word. But to begin with, it's not sensation. It's nothing to do with individuals either. Rather, if we do a project together, how do we get attention to the project? It means the attention has to be lasting. It's the French word attention. It's not the American word I'm talking about. It's not awareness. It's not that somebody knows you're there, because sensations are everywhere in media. We're sick of sensations. We're literally now at a point in 2025 where sensations don't affect us any longer. It's just somebody trying to get sensations, Timmy. I don't care. But attention, because it is credibility as well, it lasts over long periods of time. It has the quality that I'm going to stay with this. I'm going to study this. I'm going to read this damn great book, How to Paint Some Architecture. I'm going to stay with the book for months if I have to, because I want to get into this guy's brain. That's attention. And attentionalism is that with capitalism is secure enough that the vast majority of people out there who are creative and do novel things and they don't need to do it for the money any longer. And if they don't need to do it for the money, or it's just a small part of the package, they're driven by something else. All three of us are driven by totally different factors than capital. All three of us.
And most entrepreneurs.
That's what attentionalism is. Exactly. That's what attentionalism is.
Well, maybe well, that's interesting. And yes, this aspect was always there. And there's also interesting, this connects for me with one thing which I always see is what's so important to part of our anthropology, always, not only recently, we always want more. We're never satisfied. We always want on top. We're getting bored. We need more and more and more and more and more and more. And I think that's wonderful, because that's what drives all of this. And we need, and it's will to power, if you like. So that's one thing, this restlessness, this inherent restlessness I feel. I'm getting nervous that I haven't come up with something fresh and new, the new project, a new kind of step forward. That so many other people feel like this. You need progress. You need to feel things going to be better, and you have something to look forward, and you invest now. And
even if you're tired of consumerism, even if you're tired, you're never tired of art. You're never tired of art. Art can always inspire you. New, novel, creative art always inspires.
The Promethean thing, of course, not everybody with the same thing. If you're broke, if you're scared and bone-breakingly poor, and you don't have much of that. But as we're getting more, as you said, kind of unencumbered and feel more kind of, anyway, the bases are kind of covered. That's what motivates people, and that's what a lot of people don't understand when they look at entrepreneurs and overinterpret their material, that they're in there for the material drive. Yes, they want the resources, the profit for the next project, and all these people, when you talk about their net worth, it's all invested, working for me and you. If you wanted to be envy, look at the consumption standard. What is Buffett's consumption standard? What is he actually eating from your plate? Very, very little. What is his net worth? It's gigantic, but it's invested in productivity, and he's not going to eat this up in his life, nor will his children eat it. And that's with all these guys, Bezos and all these guys. They're fully invested, and the consumptions, and that's where you have to distinguish rich and poor. And this kind of left-wing kind of, this kind of absurd comparison that the net worth of this guy, the wealth, is bigger than that of Zambia. I mean, no. Look at consumption. Net worth is a meaningless concept. All of this is productively invested, and the profits are reinvested in all these wonderful projects they're doing, and they wasting, inverted commas, they can, and they don't want to waste it all, because then they have less to play with. And that's what it is. And I think this, and all these characters, I mean, this notion that Elon Musk is doing what he's doing to for his personal gain is the most reductive and nonsensical. Anyway, so I thought this restlessness, this is my anthropology, more and more, and that's wonderful, because if growth is cumulative, 30, 40 years on, I mean, this difference between 0.5% and 5% is life-changing for everybody. And that's not seen. You don't notice it from one year to the other. And that's often not emphasized enough. And that's
well, I love India for a reason. I go to India every year and I work there, and nobody talks about woke ever in India. They had the caste system already. They don't want it back. They want to get out of it.
I tell you what, it was exhilarating.
But they talk about the future all the time.
No, I should
talk
go
about
more.
new India all the time.
More to India, because you know what made me my heart soar. If you go to China 15, 20 years ago, every social occasion, every dinner table, first of all, it wasn't only that one clique, one discipline, everybody coming in, projects, entrepreneurship, collaborations, you know, which business can we make? Which business can we, this. Every single meeting that everybody was kind of hyper charged up from all the projects, all the kind of businesses. And of course, it was all these things you can look at in America and bring them here, etc. And that's where all these wonderful companies were created. Ruthless, the most ruthlessly competitive, out of which then comes Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba. They were thousands who were at their throats and running and competing and so on and so forth. I love that culture. And the lameness of Europe, where you're kind of sitting, where these opportunities are there, where you kind of paralyzed, where you sit back, where you think, you know, you make two decisions now and then it's kind of rolling on for the next 30 years and then thinking about retirement and I want to buy this house and it's another 25 years I have it and then that's it. I mean, this is depressing. And,
it is.
You know, so that's why I'm so rampantly libertarian pro-capitalist. Is really, of course, is going to deliver prosperity. It will make everybody safer and creature comforts, and you don't have to, you know, if you wanted to, you can retire early and philanthropically carve in your money. But this kind of thrill of changing the world and everybody having a stab at it, that's what I love.
Well, I totally agree. And I travel around the world, and let's see what happens in places like Argentina over the next few years. If we can have peace in Eastern Europe too. I mean, the potentials there are fantastic. I think China was unique. Obviously, it was unique. Between 1970 and 2015, China was unique in the sense that they caught up with the rest of the world, and they had that culture grounded already, and it just could just boom, buy into everything in the world. And then, of course, that was a great place to be an architect. But there will be new places for architects, certainly, and there'll be new materials, there'll be AI, there'll be all kinds of new tools. It's so inspiring talking to you, Patrik, because this is the heroic response to all the damn resentment that's out there at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
And we need to get resentment out of architecture. We need to get resentment out of art. I need to get resentment out of philosophy. This is why I recapture things like theology. And, you know, it's just to pull the carpet underneath from anybody who's in there for the wrong reasons. Which, if you're resentful, you go into philosophy. It's like if you haven't read Nietzsche, don't even get close, because I'll kill you. I'll kill you. Because Nietzsche teaches you the liberation of having nothing and then being affirmative.
Yeah. It's strange. Nietzsche, we all discovered at the age 15, 16, isn't it?
Yeah. He's still the guy. He's still the guy. It's Hegel for method and all that. It's Luhmann for system theory. But at the end of the day, it's still Nietzsche.
We love the iconoclasm. I mean, in the end, it's not only that, but you find the same energy and iconoclasm in Marx. That arrogance. That's it.
Yeah.
But if you based on something, if you see all the kind of blinded morons.
But Marx saw people who had no idea how creative they could be, but he saw that creative in them, and he was right. Absolutely. That's why he's great. That was. And Marx stands for the collective, what Nietzsche did for the individual.
And you know, you need, but it's not only. By the way, I'm just wondering. One of the I do believe in historical materialism, and you have, you know, maybe it's and technology is driving and so on. But there is still an element, let's say, where the great men historiography is not totally to be neglected. It sometimes takes figures. Of course, they need conditions and circumstances. They can make a real difference. And certainly Nietzsche, certainly Marx was one of them.
Owen has just pointed out to us we only have 2 minutes left.
No, it's okay. I have time. I have more time if you want to, but let's say we can also close. But I
was just going to, Patrik, I love this conversation. Love to put it the back of my head with you and Owen, and I would love to come back. I would love to.
Let's do another one.
I think this has been fantastic.
I mean, if you love Nietzsche and you love Marx, partly because of the, let's say, the ruthlessness of taking on the self-confidence, the ambition, and the marker they posit. Luhmann has this. Luhmann has that trenchant and he that confidence, and rightly so. So he's you know, and it's interesting. There's he took over German sociology more or less. Not
which is great, which is absolutely great.
And
the same thing happened in America too, Moritano, Varela, and everything.
Like, you know, Marx has all these Marxist reading groups and the circles. There's something around Luhmann which exists. So anyway, I just say, if you haven't looked at it, it's sharp, it's deep, it's original, and it's kick-ass cracking on.
Yeah. No, I got my mergers vector theory a lot from Luhmann, so there you go. Absolutely. I
love the flavors of it that's come through from reading it. I mean, Patrik, yes, you've got to come back because I'd love to talk to you more about your theories of art. I mean,
that's a good one.
I was reading you, in fact, and basically saying that it seems like Luhmann never quite nailed art. And then I was sitting there thinking about art and kind of naively trying to pull what the binary code I would use based on it. And this is inspired by Alexander's work with syntheism. And I went, okay, when I'm doing art, I'm trying to be immanent and relevant, but I'm also trying to be transcendent, to do something that points beyond. And then I fucking went into ChatGPT and went, what's Luhmann's concept of religion, which you don't mention? And it's transcendent.
No, I don't. Yeah.
And I go, aha, that's interesting that I just thought my way to this thing, that maybe we can rethink religion as a collective art.
Oh, he's very original on the sociology of religion and goes deep into the text as well, into theology. It's not only, I mean, it's very, I mean, because I don't see a religion going forward. I mean, that's maybe something we can talk about next time.
I love this. I love an architect who's an ardent atheist who builds building, and I walk into those buildings and get a spiritual experience. I love the irony of it, Patrik.
I have the last chapter of my big book which I'm working on. I give it another 10 is spirituality.
All right. Yeah.
I know I need to get in there. I mean, Luhmann certainly is strong, very strong and original on religion and on art. The art of society is very deep and very potent. Where I think he went wrong, he didn't have you know, look, these function systems and discourses, by the way, is the other thing which I didn't see in your work. You have it there. You're talking about the metaphysical concepts which come with each era. Let's say what Foucault would call the episteme, and that's also very strong in Luhmann. The recognition of these. Let's say he has all these kind of big books. He's fronting it with social systems. Let's say after 10 years of working up to it, ending it with the society of society, let's say, die Gesellschaft der Gesellschaft. In between, you're going all these monographs, the economy of society, the law of society, the art of society, the sciences of society, etc. He didn't do the architecture of society because the thought was an art, but that was a fallacy. But what he has running in parallel, and then he has, you know, books, monographs on power, on trust, etc., on the mass media. What is running in parallel is Gesellschaftsstruktur und Semantik. So he's looking at all these systems are systems of communication. So instead of action theory, it's communication theory, and actions, of course, are communications. And now, as I said, we're in a communication society where action is always communication. But what runs in parallel is Gesellschaftsstruktur und Semantik, is semantic resources and structures, which are continuously refunctionalized, cycled in, expanded. They mutate and morph through metaphor, analogy, and bringing in, but it's a constraint. You have that, so it's a bit like, you know, it's exaptation resources, and that, to reflect that, is another layer you find in Luhmann consistently. Let's say the ideological layer, but evolutionary theory is the overall master theory in all of that anyway. So
yeah, he brought Parsons and McLuhan to Europe. That's what he did.
I mean, by the way, and he's absorbing is in dialogue with people like Foucault, with Derrida, with all of them. They're absorbing. So is Habermas in a way. So let's say I see the post-structuralism, postmodernism, all this French philosophy is the mutation engine. But of course, we're not at the end of the grand narratives and end of theory. But that is all incorporated in that duo, Habermas, Luhmann. But the depths of this oeuvre is still stunning. That's why I invested 15 years. I haven't looked much back into it, and I've written basically the monographs which he hadn't written on architecture, but then I'm adding more, turning it pragmatic, and there's a third volume to come. I have the framework, a new framework for architecture, a new agenda for architecture, and there's another one coming. I don't know when. On let's say the new kind of practices of architecture, but since they haven't happened, we're only on that sliver. I give it a bit more time. But yeah, so let's have another session. We could also, I don't know what the topic will be, but it maybe art and religion, spirituality. I can kind of gear up to this a little bit.
Art, religion, architecture, and I would definitely like to talk more about how subcultures actually will have different architectures in the future. Because we had nation states and had different systems before. We have new types of emergence vectors, social vectors today. And
I think a lot of cultures and the differentiation of cultures, in my view, the main driver for cultural differentiation is the world division of labor, where some places or even within society, you have different sectors, very different. Sectors of the scientists different from the bankers and investors, different from actually manufacturers, networks. They're interfacing and they share something global, but they devote, like it's a resource intensive economy with a lot of mining and hardcore. I mean, there's a very different sociology underpinning that. So that's my world. I mean, maybe there's other. You see, my historical materialism is very, very kind of fundamental, and then if you could push against that, it would also be interesting. And that would be religion, contemporary religion. Is it, shouldn't it disappear? What role?
Contemporary, yes. I want new religion. I want new religion. Or I want old
but also
new
art.
religion.
Art, definitely. What is the role of art?
Yeah.
And I said, no society can. I can say society could be doing very well without religion. At this point, I'm saying this, not without. Art is an absolute necessary function system within contemporary global culture. So,
and if you use the word philosophy instead of religion, you would say
and philosophy is necessary. Philosophy is also, for instance, Luhmann has this gap. His gap is also the philosophy of society. He hasn't identified the role of philosophy. He's definitely a philosopher, but he describes himself as, he locates himself in the sciences as a social sciences sociologist, of course, who is kind of reflecting back everything. And it is this super theory is a theory which also explains its own emergence and project in the overall. You have to loop yourself back into yourself. And Marx was the first super theorist in this sense. And Luhmann is making that explicit. But there's a blind spot, philosophy. And Deleuze and Guattari, what is philosophy? And, there's different versions. I had a whole lecture on this. What is philosophy? I mean, let's say the different versions and roles of philosophy, they're irreducible to the sciences. And they're not only for interfacing. There's a very interesting parallel between philosophy and art. I don't need religion unless you convince me otherwise next time.
Listen, I'm a Zoroastrian. It's a philosophy.
Okay.
So there you go. There you go.
All right, great.
Yeah. Great. Wonderful conversation. Let's have more of this. And we already have topics set for next conversation.
So I need to leave that on while you load up the recording, right?
No, I think I just click end and then it's fine. It's on my side.
It will
yeah.
record on your end, right? It's your link. Okay, great, guys.
Big love, Patrik. See you soon.
Great talking.
More
great talk.
to be continued.
More.